Today I'm joined by John Coyle. John is silver medalist at the Olympics in 1994, some time ago. Most notable achievements next to the Olympic silver medal, a bronze medal at the Winter University Games in 1993, a bronze medal in 1995 in the World Team Championships. I've also noted down, John, in 1995 you skated an unofficial world record in 1,000 meters. And you participated in 9 world championships and came up to number 12 in the world ranking. Yeah. Cool. So that's not all. After his career, John has pursued an MBA and has worked as a business consultant, consulting to high-profile firms like Goldman Sachs, AOL, Time Warner, just to name a few. And from there, John has moved on and published some books about how to find your strengths, innovation, design thinking, and we're going to talk about that later. And one thing I found really interesting, John has found a way to hack time. We're going to speak about that later. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Christian. It's good to be here.
So your life as an athlete has been some years ago, but let's start off with that. In your life as an athlete, what was your darkest moment?
Darkest moment was not making my second Olympic team in 1998 after training for another 4 years. And for about a decade, I really thought of myself, and this is not uncommon apparently, but I didn't know it at the time, but I thought of myself as a one-timer first loser, meaning a one-time only Olympian, and first loser meaning silver medal, which sounds crazy now, but you're so hyper competitive that anything other than gold in multiple Olympics feels like a failure.
Okay. And I've also found that you missed the 1992 Olympics because of some, let's call it, suboptimal training interventions.
Yes, that's correct. I followed the Olympic program for 2 years, prep for 92. And in 1990, for example, I was in California training on my own, and I still managed to win the U.S. team trials, U.S. trials for the World Championships in non-Olympic year. And 2 years later, by following the Olympic protocol with the Olympic team, I actually finished 30th at the U.S. trials. So it definitely did not work for me.
Okay. And what did you learn from these moments?
Well, I learned something. Well, I had to relearn something. I had a coach growing up who now, in hindsight, everybody recognizes as a master coach. His name was Mike Walden. His focus was intensely on race your strengths. That's what he'd say over and over. Race your strengths, design for your strengths, and design around your weaknesses. Don't try to fix them. But the Olympic program was sort of the opposite. How do we fix your weaknesses? And that didn't work for me.
Interesting. And I also saw in your TED Talk, your dad got you into skating and also made sure that you stick to skating in the beginning, even though you weren't that successful, right?
Correct. In fact, my father and I, we did, when I was 8, we did 13 century rides. So 13 100-mile rides that summer as an 8-year-old. So, how many 8-year-olds got in that much time on the bike? Probably one. So I got my 10,000 hours in early, I'd say.
John, what was your best moment?
Actually, my best moment is a little bit of a, maybe it's unusual or not, but it's actually sort of the core of what I do now. After the 98 games, it'll sound weird probably to some people, but I was really embarrassed and humiliated for not making the team. And it turns out this is not uncommon. In fact, it's quite common. But so for about 10 years, I had nothing to do with the sport. I didn't watch it. I didn't talk to anybody. I certainly didn't talk about it. And then I got invited to be the analyst for the Olympics in 2006. So I showed up, of course, wasn't going to say no to that. And my job was to interview the parents and coaches and skaters and get the backstories about, to feed to the commentators. And on the 16th day of 17 days of the Olympics, one of the parents of one of the skaters pulled me aside and in about 20 seconds changed the entire trajectory of my life. So there we were, we're in Torino, we're at a restaurant. He says, I need to tell you something. I said, okay. And he said, I just want you to know that we wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for you. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you won't remember, but 12 years ago, after you won your silver medal, you came to a little reception in Michigan. You put your medal around my 11-year-old son's neck Alex. He'd never skated before in his life. The next day, he joined the Bay City Speed Skating Club, and tomorrow he's skating in the gold medal final round. And that literally changed my life because I had nothing to do with sport. I got my daughter skating. I started coaching. I started announcing. And most importantly, I started talking about it for the first time. And now this is all I do. I speak for a living, and I tell this story all around the world. And so that was definitely probably one of the most important moments of my life.
Oh, that's really cool. I've heard that story before, especially for that children have one of these moments before puberty hits. So it's always around these ages of 10, 11, or 12. It's funny. So, yeah, interesting.
The author John Coyle calls it moments of ignition. And there's a lot that leads into it. Like he had to have been primed. He had to be ready. He had to be in a space where a small moment suddenly becomes big. It doesn't happen purely by magic, but I would love to be able to figure out how to design those, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. John, if you could go back in time 10, 15, 20, 30 years, what advice would you give your younger you?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say a surprising piece of advice is it only gets better. Like my 25-year-old self really thought that that was it. Like it's never going to get better. And I'm so much happier now. I'm so much more fulfilled now. Life is so much richer now. Every year gets better than the last. It's amazing how awesome life can actually continue to grow, and your impact on others can grow, and life gets more interesting. So that's what I would probably tell myself is don't think it's about to end. It's about to begin.
And is it kind of a thing, I've also heard that before talking to many high-level athletes, that as an athlete, you're very, very driven. So you have, let's say, it seems like there's a difficulty of enjoying the process. Right. And after the career, not everyone, but a lot of people seem to look back and say, I should have enjoyed the process a bit more.
Yeah, I think I'm one of the lucky ones. After I quit the Olympic program and started training by myself, I really loved that actually. And so I definitely learned to appreciate the process along the way. But you're right. I mean, so Apollo Owen and I, we just did an interview on Friday. He's writing a book about the exit from professional and Olympic sport. And here's two quick stats for you. The average Olympic athlete faces about 10 years of on and off again depression, which is not surprising when you think about it because their identity is tied up with it. And here's a really more shocking one. The average NFL player, who, by the way, earn millions of dollars per year, they are bankrupt. 78% of them are bankrupt within 3 years. So it's a hard transition when your identity is tied up with this lifestyle in sport, and sport is simple. Like, let's face it, turn left, go fast. Like, that's not complicated. Real life is complicated.
So following up on your idea of finding strength, you have been a successful cyclist as well, right?
That's correct, yes.
Do you think if you would have doubled down on one of the disciplines, so short track skating or cycling, you could have been even more successful?
Well, I did eventually. I had to choose. I was doing both for a long time, and my goal really was to compete in both sports in 2 different Olympics. But cycling at the time had gotten more and more professional. Mm-hmm. And skating was still amateur. And so I was actually cycling for the 7-Eleven team, which became Motorola, which became its current iteration is, I forget. But it's the same coach still. It's Jim Akowitz. And when I turned 18 and I got into Stanford, Jim said to me, okay, well, welcome to the senior team. You've been embraced. You're welcome to join the professional team. We'll see you in February in Dallas. And I said, how about June? Because I'm going to be at college in Stanford. And he's like, this is a decision point for you. You got to choose your future career. So I chose education over cycling. And then I doubled down on skating after that because I could still do skating at the time. Now there's no chance you could go to college full-time and be a U.S. Olympic athlete. It's not possible.
Okay, cool. What are the habits that make you a successful person or athlete?
You know, Apollo asked me that last week, and it's only the second time I think I've ever been asked that. And I had to really think, and I will say that I think that this is true, and I think it's what's not true of a vast majority of both professional and Olympic athletes. I am willing to ask for help. And so when I retired, here I am 30 years old. I never had a job. I don't have any money. I have a huge debt from both student loans and just paying for my skating career. I reached out to everybody I could think of and said, help me figure out how to make this transition. Like, I need to get a job, you know? And I had several people come out and mentor me and teach me how to interview and to create a resume and to show up in a way that people would want to hire me. And I got my first job was a 6-figure job, which is very unusual for a 30-year-old with no experience. But I got into consulting, which is a high-paying, very high, difficult lifestyle. I worked 80 hours a week for the next 7 years. But I think that's one of the things that defines me is I am willing to ask for help. I'm not too proud to not reach out when I need support.
Is that also something that helped you to make the transition to being a successful businessman? Obviously, you said it helped you to get into that job, but to further advance your career from being a consultant to being a speaker, author, and I mean, you are actually, what's the name? I mean, you're helping people, right? You're inspiring people.
Yes. No, for sure. I developed over the years sort of a like an inner circle or a group of mentors that I would reach out to on some interval, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and ask for their advice given my current career path or set of learnings or what have you. And it was about 4.5 years ago that one of them heard me tell a story in a meeting, and he said, "Hey, that story would make a great TED Talk." And I was like, "Well, I don't know how to do that." He's like, "Well, no, I'll help you. I've done one myself." So he coached me a bit. I submitted my idea to TED. They accepted it, and after it was recorded, some of my clients started asking me to do it for them. And now, fast forward 3.5 years later, this is all I do.
Nice, nice. Do you have a morning routine?
This is embarrassing. Yes. It's just not the one that everybody else talks about. I sleep in till whenever I sleep into, which is usually about 10. I make bulletproof coffee. I cook some eggs usually, and I don't really do anything till about 11. I'm a total night owl, so I don't do any real work probably before noon. And most of my real work starts at about 10 p.m.
Nice. Interesting. How long do you work then? More
or less. You know, it depends. The beauty of this gig is my time is my own. If I'm not on stage, I can pretty much choose whatever I want to do, wherever I want to go. Last weekend, I decided to fly to Jamaica because I could. I travel a lot for work, and I also travel a lot when I'm not working because I like to travel. But there are times where I'll work 14-hour days for 3, 4, 5 weeks on end. I wrote the book in 3 weeks of 14-hour days. I didn't move hardly. I just sat and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. But it was just pouring out of me. So I just fell into that. So it ebbs and flows. And this is one of the things I talk about is continuous stress, chronic stress is extraordinarily bad for you. It'll kill you. Episodic stress is extraordinarily good for you. So diving deep into something for a week or two and then taking a big rest and going somewhere and chilling out, like that's the way to do it. And that's the way sports are designed, right? Sports got it right. Like super high intensity races in the weekend, recover, chill, easy practices for a couple of days, heat it back up. Like sports do it right. And most work people don't do it right. They're chronically in stress, and it's actually really dangerous.
Yeah. I think that also ties in very well with what you're speaking about. If you find your strengths,
yes.
you can get into that flow state.
Yes.
But if you have to operate on, let's say, weaknesses or points that are not your strengths, then obviously it's so much harder and it drains to go through it.
Yeah, if you play whack-a-mole with weaknesses all day, it just sucks the life out of you, right? It's even hard to smile. It's definitely difficult to get the energy to go hang out with friends or be creative. But when you can find your area of where you do your best work and do at least some of that every day, it's really energizing. And but most people, I think a vast majority of people, Thoreau would call it, most men live lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Sadly, I think that's true of a lot of people.
I think so too, yeah.
Clearly not you, though.
Let's see. Okay. How do you prepare for important moments?
I have always ritualized my preparation. So for skating, for example, I got very nervous being near the ice or in what they call the heat box where you're getting your skates on. So I was always the last one to show up. I was literally like finishing tying the bow when they called the line. I didn't want to spend time there. And I had a pre-prep routine for talks. I don't really get that nervous, but I always do the same thing to take the uncertainty out of it. So I show up at a certain time. I don't have to rehearse or anything, but I do keep myself in a quiet space for about 10 minutes prior, just so I'm ready to go and fully present. So rituals, I think, are really important for important moments.
Okay. And what you've learned as an athlete, you've taken that into your career now as well?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's, speaking is not entirely dissimilar. There's a lot of prep in terms of writing the book or writing the speech, and then you got to show up and you got to deliver, and you have to deliver every single time. You can never not deliver because there's 500 people looking at you, and if you screw that up, whew, I mean, it hasn't happened yet. I don't think it will, but it could. So yeah, being ready to be on, ready to deliver every single time without fail, that's critical. Because they're paying you a lot of money to show up for an hour. So
it has happened to me once. I had a complete blackout.
Really?
Luckily, the audience was very junior people, so I started talking about something, and they looked at me and thought I know what I'm talking about. I was so uncomfortable.
Oh my God, yeah. I actually so I do a talk, as you probably know, on time and time perception. And when I do that talk, sometimes I actually fake like I've lost my thread, and I'll time it. I do it for 15 seconds, and I'll just sit there and I'll be like, and that 15 seconds seems like an eon to the audience, right? Because it's so uncomfortable. And then I go and I get off stage and I show a sign. I'm like, first I said, was anybody uncomfortable? And everybody's like laughing because now they realize it's a joke. And so that was 15 seconds, not a minute, not 5, not 10. Yeah. And it gets back to that sort of time perception thing. I
saw that in your second TED Talk, and it was 8 seconds. And it was really the first time I thought, I was like, what the heck is going on? And it was so short, actually. But it felt like it was not eternity, but it felt long.
Right. Yeah, last time I did it last week, I did 15, which is twice as long. And you can imagine that felt like just forever.
Yeah, nice. How do you overcome setbacks?
Well, we talked before a little bit about asking for help. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I think I'm pretty skilled at, and I'll use that word intentionally because I think it is a skill, is getting perspective. Like, let's say you're trying to get a job, a promotion, for example, or there's a girl you really like, or there's a school you want to get into, or anything that you're pursuing with all of your energy, right? And there's not that many things in life. Like, that's 3 really big ones, right? And it's really easy to get into what I call 100-0 mindset. I'll either get in and life will be awesome, or I'll fail and I'm a loser. And it's so typical of athletes, particularly. And the reality is life is never 100-0. There's always odds. And this is where games, and particularly video games, I think are really good, is you start to think in percentages. Oh, I got a 70% chance of getting this job. I've got a 50% chance of this girl calling me back. I've got, an 80% chance of getting this promotion. As soon as you start to think in percentages, it actually changes your brain chemistry. This is very new neuroscience. It's less than a year old. So as soon as you gamify, that's what they call it, but as soon as you put statistics and you move something from 100-0, by the way, is your fight, flight, freeze response. That's cortisol. That's dukes up, run away. You're amped up. Your blood vessels contract. You're ready for action. And you also narrow your focus. That's all totally fine if a lion's coming at you out of the jungle, or if somebody's got an axe and they're running at you. It's very, very maladaptive for complex problems of today. So what you actually want is to think, all right, I got a 50-50 shot. That changes cortisol to DHEA, which actually broadens your perspective. And you get oxytocin as well, which causes you to ask for help. So as soon as you can gamify a challenge and say, I've got this percent shot, you're going to look for more opportunities and you're going to ask for help. And that's way more adaptive. So this is really new stuff.
Do you have a role model?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that. I mean, a lot of them, particularly my mentors. I mean, Mike Walden was my coach growing up. He was the one who really anchored to race your strengths, race your strengths, race your strengths. He's obviously a huge role model. By the way, he produced 10 Olympians, 6 world champions, 6 Olympic medals, and for a 40-year stretch had 28% of U.S. podiums in cycling, male, female, of all ages, out of one club in Detroit. Like, amazing. So Mike, for sure. I would say actually another one would be Malcolm Gladwell. I mean, I don't know him, but the inspiration to take complex things and turn them into narratives that ordinary people can understand. It took me a while to realize. It was actually my business partner, Monica. She's like, I would have imposter syndrome. I'm like, why should I be able to write a book? Like, why should I be able to speak in front of people? Like, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a this. I'm not a that. And she's like, now there's Malcolm Gladwell. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, if you can take complicated information and distill it down to meaningful narratives for other people that they can actually understand, because these white papers they're inscrutable, they're impossible. It's a valuable thing, actually. And so I've sort of mostly gotten over my imposter syndrome thanks to people like Malcolm Gladwell.
I love his books.
Yeah, great.
I like him. Yeah. And these people are role models because they have something you aspire to be?
Yes, I would say that's correct. I mean, I don't know about Mike. I would never be a challenger like he was. He was a yeller. That's not my mode. I'm more of a coach or encourager. But his incredible focus on how do you specify, find, and then design for your unique strengths is something the world needs to hear, and it's a big part of what I do every day. I mean, I'll give you a quick anecdote. So Mike, for everybody on the team, it's, I don't know, it's 50, 60 people on the team. For everybody on the team, he had a short, pithy quote that he yelled at you 1,000 times. And it sounded simple to the point it almost sounded stupid. Like I was 11 years old and he kept saying the same thing. Coyle, you got to win it at the line. And as 11-year-old, I'm like, well, no, duh. Like, where else am I going to win it, right? But actually, it was very complicated. It took him a while to figure that out, but he ascertained my strengths and weaknesses. So here's the translation is, Coyle, you have no aerobic motor. You have no endurance. So you need to time your sprint in cycling and skating to barely win by the smallest of margins, because if you go too early, well, everybody's going to catch you and blow by you. Well, and if you go too late, well, that's too late. So Coyle, you needed to win at the line because that's your only shot. And hearing that 1 billion times as a kid, I mastered that, winning over 400 races by tiny margins. I never won by any big margin. Conversely, my teammate, Frankie Andreu, you might know the name, won a race once by 18 minutes. But his advice was exactly contrary to mine. And Mike was funny in his own way. He was like, you got to drop Coyle, meaning that was his whole advice to Frankie, meaning you're not a sprinter. You need to break away. You need to drop the sprinters, Coyle being the most notorious. So you need to get away from all the sprinters because they'll beat you at the line every time. And if you are not away, they're going to beat you. So you need to break away. That's what Frankie did over and over and over. 9 Tours de France, 4th in the Olympics. I mean, amazing career.
What is the best advice you received and who gave it to you?
Yeah, it's easy. It's Mike Walden. Race your strengths. Find what they are first, specifically, very specifically, and then double down again and again and again on those. I would never have made an Olympic team if I hadn't realized his advice after 2 years with the Olympic team. And then I quit the team, not the sport, and started training on my own and designing a new track for my own style and my own strengths. And that same meet where I got 30th and got my ass kicked for the Olympic trials, 1 year to the day later is when I came back, and in my first race back, I broke the U.S. record by 5 seconds and skated faster than the world record by 1 second in the same race, same me, better approach.
Why was it an unofficial world record, if I can ask?
Yeah, so in short track, there's 2 requirements for a world record. You have to have international judges present, and there were none because it was the U.S. trials, and it can't actually be in a time trial. It needs to be in a pack-style event. This was the time trial they used to sort of seed the races. To be honest, it's potentially easier to skate a world record with a group if you've got somebody leading it out. Like I was by myself, so I had no draft. But the other advantage to being on your own is there's not a bunch of skaters scratching up the ice, so the ice was pretty darn good. It's probably an even trade-off.
So back in the days, how did a typical training day look like?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the training days when I left the team and I was on my own. They were particularly challenging because I needed to feed myself and clothe myself and house myself. I wasn't living at the Olympic Training Center. So my routine was the same for 3 years. I got up at 6:30, ate breakfast, got changed, got my skating stuff on, got in the car, drove to the rink at 7, got there at 7:30. From 7:30 to 8, I set up all the blocks, the pads, the ice, the water, skated from 8 until 10, took everything off the ice, put it away till 8:30, went to the locker room, showered, changed, put on my suit because I had a day job. So I worked part-time for an engineering company. Drove there, got there at 10, worked from 10 till 2:30. So 4.5 hours plus lunch. It was really 4 hours. And then I would get in my car and I would drive to Chicago, 3 hours away, to go to grad school at night at Kellogg. So I'd drive there. I'd get there at 5:30, 5:45. Class started at 6. Class went from 6 to 9. I'd drive 2 hours back to Milwaukee. And then I would do my weight workout or my jump workout from 11 to midnight. And then I'd get up and do it again. So I did that for 3 years.
Okay.
Long days.
Did you manage with little sleep?
You know, I was getting about 7 hours, 6.5, which was enough for me at that time. It's no longer enough for me now.
Okay. We all get older. I wanted to touch on your TED Talks.
Yes.
So for everyone who's watching this or listening to that, John has done 2 TED Talks and they are truly value-packed. So I think we can't summarize that here because it's value after value. But there are 2 things I would like to talk about because they really are interesting for me.
Sure.
So in your first TED Talk, it's quoted, if at first you don't succeed, you said,
Yeah.
if you're willing to quit, you get perspective.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
So think about this. Think about maybe a relationship that might be drawing to a close. So you've been dating someone for a while and then you're wondering whether this is going to work long term. Up until then, you're very emotionally charged and engaged and you're trying to make it work, Same as for sports, same as for like a major in college or anything that's really highly important to your future. And you're so close in, you just can't see the forest for all the trees. But then you say, well, you know what? Maybe this should end. Maybe I should switch majors. Maybe I should break up with this person. Maybe I need to quit this job. And so then you back up and you start to be able to see around the edges of this obstacle and get a little more objective. And when you can be objective about the challenge, a lot of times the right answer is to quit, to do something else. But not always. Sometimes you're like, oh, wait, this person has so many great qualities. And if I just shift my perspective a little, I can adjust to that. Or this job actually has all these perks and I just didn't really utilize them or what have you. And so that ability to back up and analytically see a challenge that mostly has been an emotional barrier for you allows you to have that brief moment of perspective and to make an informed decision. And it also allows you to ask other people. And then you can make good decisions. But if you just try to make all your decisions in the emotional short term, you're probably going to fail to see the opportunity the way it really is, if that makes sense. Okay.
And how do you have a tip how you can do that? I mean, I know from NLP, neuro linguistic programming, they have different, I think they call it different positions, first, second, and third. So that sounds like it. Do you have any other tips how you can utilize it for yourself, for the people who are listening or watching?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing, and it's really part of what I would call the design thinking protocol. The design thinking is just a method of creative problem solving, but the design thinking mindset is a really unique one. It's a trade-off between analytical detachment around what the problem is, and then highly emotionally charged problem solving. So most people tend to be highly emotionally charged the whole time. Oh, here's a problem. Here's a solution. Let's go at it. Like I call it Maslow's hammer and Occam's razor. Like the simplest solution to any given problem is the right one is Occam's razor, except when it's not. And then Maslow's hammer is if all you have is a hammer, you're going to treat everything like a nail. And that's the way people problem solve all the time. But what you really need to do is be detached about, do I understand the problem? And the phraseology in English, at least, is committed but not attached. So I'm committed to solving this problem, but I'm not attached to any particular mechanism to do so. So as soon as you can bring the designer's mindset, then you're way back here looking at it from a bunch of different angles. And then and only then when you're like, all right, this seems to be the most viable solution. Let me pursue it with all my vigor until it fails. And then I need to back up again. And again, look at it analytically and detached. This is a hard balance. It's very difficult for people. All of us, I think, tend to be highly emotionally attached to outcomes. And that's okay. Outcomes is fine. But you don't want to be emotionally attached to methodologies to get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the most important one, that's because it has a bit of a reaction of resistance in me. In that talk, you also said, abide by the two-year rule. So if something doesn't work for 2 years, you should quit. I mean, that's very difficult for me to understand, but I think it's highly interesting.
Well, so the people ask me, how do you know when to quit, right? Like, how can you know? You can't be good at anything in a week. I mean, maybe if you're just supernaturally gifted with springy muscles, you might be reasonably good at high jumping. All right. That's a very rare thing. But you can't be a great writer. You can't be a great orator. You cannot be a great speed skater or gymnast, pretty much anything else without putting in the time. So we're wired, we're programmed, we're actually operant conditioned since youth to never quit, right? You never give up, you never give in, quitters never prosper, good things come to those who wait. And this is great programming until it falls off the rails for adults, because at some point, maybe you were supposed to be an artist or a painter or a mathematician or a philosopher or an orator or something, and you're doing accounting. And you're okay-ish at it. So you don't quit because you're programmed. I don't quit this. I'm going to keep trying. And you're a mid-level accountant for the rest of your life. And you never got a chance to do what you're doing. Like, you're putting on a podcast with Olympians from all around the world because you chose to break from whatever it is you were doing before to take this risk. And most people, I think, don't do that. So that's where I think the 2-year rule is a reasonably good one. If you're like pursuing a major or a relationship or a sport and you're not seeing progress after about 2 years, maybe it's 1, maybe it's 3, it's definitely not 10. Like, you do not want to pursue something for 10 years with no progress. You've just wasted, an 1/8 of your life. That's wasted time. So how to know? I mean, I actually quit my job 4 times in 8 years. So it's almost exactly perfect. But I didn't actually leave. I just asked for an adjacent role. Does that make sense? So yeah, I was in operations. That's not really a good fit for me. So I moved over to strategy. That's a better fit for me, but it's really analytical. So I moved over in innovation and so forth. So I kept tic-tacking my way to things that are a closer fit to what I'm good at. It doesn't mean fully quit, abandon, and go away. The other things you can do is reframe your approach or try a different way, like I did with skating. Or you make it a hobby. There's nothing wrong, like golf. There's nothing wrong at pursuing something you're bad at. You just don't want to make it your primary relationship or source of income, if that makes sense.
And then now for the second TED Talk. So how to design moments that help you to live almost forever. I think that was highly interesting, especially for someone like me who difficulties understanding it in the beginning. But I also think it was quite confronting. So basically you teach people to you call it experiential time, right? So you have three variables, which is contraction, inversion, expansion.
Yes.
And by that, you can increase the experiential time.
Yes.
So how you perceive time.
Yes.
And you teach that to people, right?
Yes. And I'm working on a book right now, but it's the most important thing I'm working on now. And the neuroscience is just it's just exploding recently. There was almost nothing on this a few years ago. So we really didn't know how time perception or memory worked, but now we know a lot. And to give you the super short lesson, your brain right now and my brain are sweeping memories from short-term memory to long-term memory about every 2 seconds. And it's the hippocampus, which is in your back brain, that's doing this. Now, it might not store everything. It might not store anything. That's what happens when you go on autopilot and you drive to work and you don't know how you got there. Or it might store something, but you can't find it. So my argument would be, if you store something, you can't find it, it's lost anyway, so it doesn't count. So the trick to time perception, to experiential time, is what is stored, how much is stored, and can you find it, right? So recallability, depth of data, and was it stored at all? Now, the hippocampus it's an okay machine. It's lazy. It will only store stuff if it's kind of unique or different. So you'll lose yourself into routine things. So routine is the enemy of time perception. But this is where it gets interesting. The amygdala is another part of the brain, sits right next to the hippocampus, and it's dormant a lot of the time. It's a sentinel. It's waiting to wake up. But if something causes it to wake up, your frame rate goes from every 2 seconds to 10 times a second. So now you're writing memories 20 times faster. Amygdala memories are really notable for a couple things. They're highly recallable, nearly perfectly recallable. They store lots of data, and you never lose them. So 8-year-olds, you remember how long summers were when you were 8? Mm-hmm. Summers as 8-year-olds lasted forever because their amygdalas were on basically 24/7. This is unique. This is different. This is dangerous. This is scary. This is risky. This is amazing. This is joyful. Like on high alert all the time. So it's just storing all this data. And then we get, a decade or two older and we're like, oh, life is safe and comfortable. I've designed it this way. And so the hippocampus takes over and it gets lazy too. And suddenly you're not storing anything. So the real trick to memory expansion, to time expansion, which is related to memory expansion, is you got to use the amygdala to write memories. And that means the greatest quote here is, life begins at the edge of your comfort zone, if you've heard that before. Mm-hmm. If you're not pushing some boundaries, if you're not taking some risk, if you don't have some exposure to ups and downs in your life, which we try to avoid as adults, then you're actually not going to write it down. And if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. If it didn't happen, you weren't alive. And therefore, you're basically dead at 40.
That's interesting. And I saw you teach people in retreats, right? How to learn.
Yes. Yes.
How long are these retreats, out of interest?
So it's 3 days, 2 nights. So it's actually 45 hours total, to which most people say, oh my God, I've been gone a month. Because we do it, we do it right. It's experiential. I mean, I want to give away all the secrets, but the last one we did, we put everybody on a bus after they registered. We blacked out all the windows in the front. I got on and said, it's 17 hours to Tijuana. There's no bathroom. I'll see you there. And then we sent them off. And then they actually did not go to Tijuana. They went about 45 minutes up a mountain where the bus driver stopped, got out, and ran away. And then they milled around for a while, like, what the hell's going on? And they finally spilled out, and they're on top of a mountain. The sun's about to set. And then they saw the little trail of broken watches, and they realized that's probably the way they're supposed to walk. And just as they crested the hill, the music lit up, the tents lit up, long table dinner for 50 with a cellist. And that's the thing. You create these unique, memorable tense, you have to have some tension moments, and then the amygdala is on and it's writing and it's writing and it's writing and time expands. It totally works.
And what people learn, they can take it with them and reproduce that.
Exactly.
Nice.
So I'm going to tell you real quickly something that came out of this that might be significant. And this will be the first time I've ever said this publicly. But if this is true, then your show will hold potentially one of the most important insights maybe of the last 50 years. And I'm not joking if this is true. I don't know it to be true. There are two people,
internet connection holds up.
Yeah, there are 2 people at the summit with early stage Alzheimer's. Subsequent to the summit, both of them decided to buck tradition, which, by the way, Alzheimer's patients are encouraged to create routine and stay to the same, keep everything safe and everything in the same place and do the same thing every day. And I submit that I think it's exactly perfectly wrong advice. It's sort of like margarine, eat margarine. It's exactly perfectly wrong. So they've both gone on a series of adventures over the last 3 months since. I don't have the scores for the second person, but the first person got tested for short-term recall just before the summit, and it was 73%. So, well below average in terms of being able to recall things, which is normal for Alzheimer's. And the perpetuated belief is there's no solution. You can't stop it. You can slow it, but there's only one direction, and this is ubiquitous. 2 weeks ago, he got tested, and he's at 96%. The other patient is experiencing the ability to recall much better than before. So this is only anecdotal at this place. But if the amygdala is able to cut through and lay down new ways to lay down memory where the hippocampus can't, then maybe that's the trick, which is to get the mind to lay down these serious highways of memory recall that the hippocampus could then use to recall normal stuff as well. If this is true, it's going to change the entire protocol for Alzheimer's treatment. And I hope it's right. Oh, God, I hope it's right.
I hope so, too. Where can people find more information about that? I mean, about I think theartofliving.com?
Yeah, or johnkcoyle.com. They actually lead the same place. So theartofreallyliving.com or johnkcoyle.com. All my videos are there. My blog, I write a lot about time, memory, strengths, all of that stuff. The TED Talks are there. Yeah, you can find everything there.
Do you want to nominate someone to be interviewed?
Yeah, I can think of a couple guys, and I'll send you an email. But Cody Royal is somebody that you might want to. He's not an Olympian, but he's been basically coaching the pros and coaching the pro coaches for a long time. I mean, Apollo would be a good one, I think, especially with considering the book he's writing now about the exit from sport and how difficult it is. Gosh, I mean, there's, you name it. I mean, you got Dan Jansen, like the whole speed skating crew, of course. I know all those people. So you pick somebody, I'll make the intro. Happy to help.
Yeah, that would be great. Apollo has actually already been nominated by Gideon Massey.
I don't even know who that is. What's the name?
Track cycling. Gideon Massey.
Oh, I don't know.
He's a track cyclist.
Okay.
He competed at the 2004-2008 Olympics.
Okay.
But yeah, Apollo, I would like to speak to him. That would be cool.
Yeah, the timing's good now with this book coming out.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's others. If you send me an email and ask me, I'll get you a list.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be really awesome. So we spoke about your web presence. Where else can people find you? What social profiles are you using?
So I'm on Facebook as The Time Guy. John K. Coyle, The Time Guy. I'm on Instagram as Coyle John K. Same with Twitter, Coyle John K. And LinkedIn, John K. Coyle.
Awesome. John, thanks a lot for your time.
That was good fun, buddy.
That was really good.